Hello and welcome, Reese here from the International Gamer Pubcast, and today I'm going to talk to you about why I think Nintendo is doing so many timed Switch releases this year. So, what do the upcoming localization of Fire Emblem and 3D Mario All-Stars have in common? And no, that's not just the fact that they're both first-party Switch titles, but they're actually both only available for a limited amount of time. That's right, both physically and digitally, Nintendo is going to take away our option to buy these games after March 2021. But I do think Nintendo will release each of the 3D Mario All-Stars games separately after this point, so you probably will still be able to officially get your hands on Mario 64, Sunshine and Galaxy on the Switch at some point in time. But the question remains, why the hell is Nintendo doing all these timed releases? And the short answer to that question is what the answer typically is in the AAA game space, to be honest, and that is money. In this case, kind of leveraging our nostalgia to make us buy shit right now. So if you don't really know how public companies work, companies like Nintendo need to show revenue growth to their shareholders each year, and if for whatever reason a company doesn't have year-on-year revenue growth, the shareholders are going to start asking questions. Long story short, they're going to be pissed off. And this is not something that Nintendo wants. After all, it is the shareholders who are keeping the lights on, right? And also during all this, we have the pandemic going on, which has resulted in so many more people than ever before playing games as a means to kill boredom, to socialize with their friends, and to, quite frankly, escape this shit situation that we're all finding ourselves in right now. This, along with the insane sales and revenues from Animal Crossing, meant that Nintendo's revenues for Q1 2020 were actually more than 6 times higher than the same period in 2019. So obviously Nintendo and its shareholders are extremely happy about this, but it also means that the pressure is on for the rest of the year and beyond, because simply put, Nintendo's release schedule for the rest of the year is pretty barren. Like, there's not a lot going on except Hyrule Warriors, which isn't to everybody's tastes, and now Nintendo has set this kind of insanely high hurdle for itself that it needs to jump over in the coming months and years. And this is going to be insanely difficult because, as we know, all of Nintendo's eggs are kind of in one basket now. In the past, they had their home consoles, your Wii's, your N64s, but also your portable consoles, so your DS's, your Game Boys. Now it's all in that Switch basket. I mean, there is the Switch Lite, but that's a different story. And Nintendo has had some experiments in mobile, but it didn't go as well as they had anticipated. And I mean, there is the theme park stuff as well, but I don't need to explain to you why not many people are going to be in a theme park right now. What this means is that Nintendo needs us to keep going out and buying Switch software before the end of the fiscal year to keep their shareholders happy. And one of the ways they're clearly doing this, to me anyway, is kind of, saying you need to go out before March 2021 to buy these nostalgia-packed experiences, otherwise you're going to miss out. They're kind of tying into that fear of missing out marketing that seems to be so popular in games at the moment. And, they want us to go out and buy the game physically or digitally before the end of the fiscal year. And when does that fiscal year end? It's at the end of March 2021 for Nintendo, which cannot be a coincidence, right? It seems to me that they just want us to go out and buy these games then so they can get that cheeky revenue bump for their shareholders. And this false scarcity seems to be working very, very well for Nintendo. So I'm just having a look at the Amazon best-selling video products of the year so far. And as you can see, Animal Crossing is number 1 out of all the games because there are a lot of gift cards and stuff like that as well. But let's just look at the games here. So number 1 for games, Animal Crossing, because of course it is. And then here we are at number 2 is Mario 3D All-Stars. So this false scarcity is obviously working. Now this is just the Amazon charts for the US for the year, but Amazon is one of the biggest sellers in the US of games, if not the biggest seller. And while it is just boxed, not digital, this does give us kind of like a really good benchmark for how well Nintendo is doing here. And just to put this in perspective, 3D All-Stars is above games like The Last of Us Part 2. Let's see, it's also above Smash Brothers, Luigi's Mansion, It's above Final Fantasy VII, Cyberpunk pre-orders, so yeah, it's just doing insanely well for Nintendo. Their tactic is working. Which is no surprise really, because Nintendo has allegedly kind of done this false scarcity thing in the past with the Wii, with the Switch, and with the NES and SNES classics. So, if they're going to kind of, need to show this revenue bump to their shareholders, it's maybe no surprise that they're trying a tried and true Nintendo tactic. And I personally think we're just going to see more and more of this anti-consumer kind of experimentation in the games industry going forward. Because let's face it, like the big guys like EA, Activision, Ubisoft, they've all had like skyrocketing revenue throughout the pandemic. And they need to kind of keep their revenue numbers above this high bar that they've set for themselves to keep their shareholders happy. And like, let's face it, the AAA games industry is all about this growth, which is why we've seen kind of these companies doing mass layoffs despite getting record profits. And it's why I think we're seeing companies like EA and 2K experimenting with unskippable ads, which we saw recently in the NBA 2K21 and a few weeks before that with UFC. So yeah, we're just going to see a lot more of this kind of thing, especially as once the pandemic ends, which I hope is sooner rather than later, a lot of those kind of new gamers, they're going to go back to their old lives, they're going to be doing the things they used to do before the pandemic, going out, socializing with their friends, going to bars, doing stuff like that. So there's going to be a major user retention issue in the industry, I think. And one of the ways that companies are going to try and offset this is by doing more of these kind of experimentations with intrusive ads, timed releases, stuff like that. And this worries me because, frankly, the games industry, the AAA games industry on console and PC, I should say, is already taking far too many cues from the insidious and predatory, like, mobile monetization mechanics. And it's a little bit worrying for me. But for Nintendo, at least, I think this false scarcity is just kind of a little stopgap until the Switch Pro comes out next year, if Bloomberg sources are to be believed, which they usually are, when we'll also likely see Breath of the Wild 2 and a lot of bigger games like that. So yeah, I just think Nintendo is trying to tie their shareholders over until then. I think it's as simple as that. Hopefully we won't see much more of this kind of predatory behavior from Nintendo in the future, but we shall see. And that'll about do it. Thank you very much for joining. If you agree with what I said, if you disagree with what I said, give me a comment in the section below and I'll get back to you. And if you want to hear more about my kind of ramblings about games, you can follow me on Twitter at SuperReese right there. And I also do a podcast together with three of my good friends who I also work with. It's called the International Gamer Pubcast, and it kind of does what it says on the tin. We're a bunch of international dudes, all from different places. We all work in the industry, and we basically have a few beers, sometimes, actually most times, more than a few beers, and just kind of have a good time, talk about the news in games, what we've played, and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you very much for joining my first YouTube video, so a bit awkward and a bit stumbly, but I am a bit awkward and a bit stumbly, so yeah, there will be improvements though. So yeah, thank you very, very much for joining. Reese out.